Greetings, it is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! It is time to continue our discussion on Spelljammer. I've been talking about the AD&D campaign settings and Dungeons & Dragons campaign settings in general, but now I'm continuing with the Dungeons & Dragons adventures in space. Now, when we last left off, I was talking about some of the common spheres and common places related to these campaign settings that you might be visiting. In this episode, it's going to be all about the races I previously talked about, playing some of them, being able to play them as some of your characters. Now, I'm going to note here, everything I'm going to say is going to be related to 2nd edition, AD&D. If you're going to adapt this for modern age, I will perhaps talk about that at a later point in time or publish something myself online. There is material out there for looking for adapting it for different editions of Dungeons & Dragons. They have been adapted, some of them before at least. But regardless, let's move on and talk about the Dracon. I have mentioned about the Dracons before, but when you're playing one, you're going to automatically get some bonuses to strength and penalties to dexterity. They make excellent clerics and fighters. There's going to be a lot of formalities to the way you'll do things. That's going to relate, of course, to the nature of the herd with you. That the herd is the most important when you're playing one of these. It's also important to note that the idealism that they have is to flee or talk out things before diving into combat. But they aren't against going into a fight if they necessarily do, and they're oftentimes willing to bring in the group. They're not much more of the individual fighting it out. They're you're against us. Now, they have on a base weapon level, they have their own type of thin-bladed longsword that they use, but they also are masters of a type of wrestling that they often use to kind of deal with any kind of conflicts that they need within their own society, so a little more safer. They respect anything that would be a four-legged being. Two-legged beings, they kind of look as if they're deformed, and they're very polite about it. They kind of like look at all the two-legged beings out there like, oh yeah, oh you're okay, you're okay. They really just give a little bit of that idealism of being nice and polite about it. That they have their own language of Dracon, and they are known to speak the dragon's language. Some of them do learn Common with a heavy accent, especially because they have been traveling out into space, but again, it's not a natural language for them. Now, in comparison to a human, they have a base movement rate of 18, much higher than that of human. And anything based upon that movement rate, any kind of numbers, are going to go up accordingly. They are also quadrupedal, if that really makes a difference. And they are considered a size larger than humans. They are larger than humans. They certainly are. Now, the Giff, the hippo people, they gain strength but lose intelligence. And it's important to note that on average, they stand about 9 feet tall. So they're pretty big. They make great fighters and thieves. Now, again, because they are mercenaries, they are known to deal with all groups, say usually from Nyogi and Beholders. This means, though, when it comes to languages, they have their own, but many of them do learn other languages. This isn't a natural thing, but most of them in the progression of their life are known to learn languages, especially those they work for, from Common, Dwarven, Elven, or even Dracon, depending on whatever they're working for. At least one of them is going to be able to speak the language. Now, they have a natural magic resistance. This, for one thing, prevents any of them from being spellcasters, but it means that they have a 10% magical resistance that applies even to beneficial spells, that they cannot overcome this. It makes it one of the problems, and then they're dealing with magic. This also applies to magic items, that if they're using a magic item, it has a 10% chance of not functioning properly. Granted, it doesn't mean that they can't try it again the next day, but it does prevent them from possibly using it in the course of a day. They have problems with both magic in general and magic items. Now, they do have a natural attack they can do. Their heads are kind of really heavily plated, so they have a surprisingly damaging headbutt. It's very unexpected how much damage that thing can actually do if they kind of smack into you. They also have a natural armor. They have very thick skin, so their armor class starts at 6 as a basis. The one of them using a shield will go down to 5. Granted, they can get armor, which can put their armor class lower, but it has to be customly made, custom built to them. Now, the Grommans, of course, I talked about these gorilla people. They have different statistical differences depending on if they are male or female. You'd have to look at each of them to see how it goes. They're high religious. Most of them are lawful good. And they are sort of led by these female directors who actually are the in-betweens between the normal society and their demigods who actually walk among them. So they have demigods living with them. Now the males are good at being fighters and thieves and the females clerics, though they tend to have some overlapping in there that can possibly occur. The backbone of both their military and adventurers are the unmarried males, the ones more likely to travel around anyway. They have their own language, but it's a language of more sign language than anything in body language, though they can learn spoken languages like Common and often will, especially when it comes to dealing with other races. Now, though they can use cleric spells, they come across a problem with some magical resistances of their own. If they're using a magic item not made for the class they're using, so it's not something a cleric would use, not something a fighter would use, not something a thief would use, they run into a 40% chance failure that it's not going to function properly. They also do get a bonus when it comes to climbing. They get plus 25% to their climbing rolls, and effectively see how well they do. Now they are also naturally ambidextrous. That means they could fight with a weapon in each hand without penalty. So they can they can use any weapon a normal human could use. So effectively they could have like a sword in each hand and fight with it without penalty as if they had the ambidextrous abilities. Now you have to think about it this way. Male Grommans are more physically oriented, the female are going to be more mental oriented, and that's the way you're going to reflect each of them. Now let's talk about the Hadozee, or the Deck Apes. Now they get dexterity and lose charisma. They lose the charisma because they are notorious masters of insults with sharp tongues. They just can't help themselves. When it comes to their current employers, or elves, they actually will hold their tongues back very well. But for anyone else, they can even make the saltiest sailor kind of blush with the kind of things they can say, that can spew out of their mouths. Mastery of insults and just vile words could just come out of their mouths, and they mean nothing terrible or insultive by it. It just sort of happens. But again, as I said, there are those they hold back for. They are incredibly diligent workers, which oftentimes makes up for the fact that they are so insulting. Now, young Hadozee do often form into groups when it comes to going in various ships and things, and usually they'll be in groups of 20 to 30 that'll sort of then sell themselves out as a group working aboard a ship, generally speaking to get themselves more acclimated until they're a bit more of an adult and can go off on their own. Now Hadozee can be, of course, fighters, thieves, or clerics. They speak their own language, and many of them know Common. They will know any language of anyone else that they're going to be employed with, regardless of whatever language it be. It could be Goblin, Orc, Dwarven, Elven. It doesn't matter. Whoever they're going to be employed be, they will traditionally learn the language of. Now they wear little to no clothes, and very often don't wear any armor, and that's because of their gliding flaps. They want to be able to use those, which if they are falling, they can move horizontally 1 foot for every 1 foot they would glide down. So effectively they do this kind of slow glide over, 1-to-1 on the distance. Now, similar to the Gromman, they are naturally ambidextrous, using a weapon in each hand. They do prefer long swords, but have been known to fight with a shield in one hand instead of just an extra weapon, and have a shield and a long sword, and battle that way. Now, they have a 20% bonus to climbing related rolls. So that's it for today. I introduced you to some races that I had previously talked about, but I'm talking about playing them in one of your Spelljammer games now. So I gave you some basic information about each of them, just to figure out what kind of things you'd need to vote. I didn't go over to any of the requirements, any of the exact bonuses you'd get. I just gave you the basic information about what it would mean to actually play one of these races, rather than previously when I talked about encountering one. In the next episode, I'll finish up talking about all the races that you might be able to play, these optional races that are added into ones that you might be able to play as a player character. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please just leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and of course subscribe. It shows you support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you do want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.